It's wonderful to see you all here this afternoon. I'm Siri Engberg, Senior Curator and Director of Visual Arts here at the Walker Art Center. I'm thrilled to welcome our on-site and our online audiences to this special program with artists Julie Mehretu and Glenn Ligon in conversation with Kemi Ilesanmi. We are thrilled to have our audiences here on the occasion of Julie's landmark mid-career survey. And I hope you have or will have the opportunity to see this beautiful and powerful exhibition in the Walker Galleries. This is a survey that's been jointly organized by the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. And I want to acknowledge LACMA Director Michael Govan and Whitney Director Adam Weinberg for being great partners as we join this project. As many of you know, we're the final stop on this show's tour, which began at LACMA, then traveled to the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, then to the Whitney, before coming here to Minneapolis. It's an ambitious project that's been funded with lead support from the Ford Foundation and the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. We're also profoundly grateful to several close friends of the Walker for their generous support of our presentation. Honorary trustees Bruce Atwater and his wife Martha, former trustees John and Laura Taft, National Advisory Board member Margaret Wordle, and our presentation was also generously funded by honorary trustee Ralph Burnett and his wife Peggy, trustee Pat Denzer and his wife Lisa, honorary trustee Erwin Cullen and his wife Miriam, and trustee David Moore and his wife Lenny. And many thanks as well to our supporting sponsor Wells Fargo and to Marion Goodman Gallery and White Cube for generously supporting this opening day program. I want to start this afternoon by welcoming Julie Mehretu back to the Walker. So, Julie, we are absolutely thrilled to be presenting your work here once again for our audiences. And as many of you may know, Julie had her very first museum residency and exhibition here at the Walker between 2001 and 2003, which was followed by a number of important acquisitions to our collection, both of which are in the show upstairs. I know our speakers today will touch on some of this great history. I also want to welcome the exhibition's curator, Christine Y. Kim, curator of contemporary art at LACMA, who organized this exhibition with Rudeko Hockley, the Arnold Associate Curator at the Whitney in New York. Together, Christine and Rue have curated an illuminating selection of Julie's works for this stunning retrospective. Julie, it's been a real pleasure having you here installing the exhibition with us over the last few weeks. So thank you again for the time and the energy and the care that you've put into the installation and toward the Walker. We're thrilled to be presenting the work here again and are so fortunate to have this opportunity to work with you again. And I also want to extend a huge thank you to Julie's exceptional studio team led by Damian Young and studio manager Sarah Rentz, to the amazing work of the Walker staff and many departments who have come together to realize this ambitious project, which kicks off our fall season here at the Walker. For today's program, I want to acknowledge the great work of curatorial fellow Matthew Villar-Miranda, who along with Stephanie Nusser has been essential in coordinating details for the program. Today's tech and live stream are coordinated by Justin Ide, Doug Livesay, and Andy Underwood. And I want to thank visitor experience specialist Ella Campbellman for keeping everything running smoothly. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce today's speakers. Julie Mehretu is an internationally acclaimed artist whose paintings, drawings, and prints have appeared in numerous solo and group exhibitions. Since her early work was shown here in 2003, her paintings have appeared in numerous solo and group exhibitions. As you'll see today, Mehretu's work creates new narratives using a combination of meticulous drawing, gestural marks, and abstracted and blurred images of such subjects as cities, histories, geographies, wars, political upheaval, and social unrest, all in one painting sometimes. Her immersive canvases draw us in, both with their dizzying detail and their distinctive gestures that really become a way of signifying social agency, as well as suggesting an unraveling of a personal and collective biography. Julie was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1970, grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, and currently lives and works in New York. She received a Master's of Fine Arts with honors from the Rhode Island School of Design in 1997, a bachelor's from Kalamazoo College in 1992, and also studied at University Cheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, Senegal. Her exhibition history is deep and includes such major exhibitions as Documenta, the Carnegie International, and the Venice Biennale. As you will see in the exhibition, her work is also held in major museum collections worldwide, including the Whitney, Walker Art Center, Tate London, Guggenheim, the Broad, Los Angeles, LACMA in Los Angeles, and many others. Mehretu is recipient of many awards, including the MacArthur Award, that's the Genius Grant, the Berlin Prize in 2007, the U.S. Department of State Medal of Arts Award in 2015, and many others as well. So next is Glenn Ligon, who we're also thrilled to welcome here today. Glenn Ligon, born in 1960, is an artist living and working in New York, and throughout his career he has pursued an incisive exploration of American history, literature, and society across bodies of work that build critically on the legacies of modern painting and conceptual art. Glenn is best known for his landmark text-based paintings made since the late 1980s, which draw on the influential writings and speech of 20th century cultural figures that include James Baldwin, Zora Neale Hurston, Jean Genet, and Richard Pryor. Ligon received a BA from Wesleyan University and attended the Whitney Museum Independent Study Program. In 2011, the Whitney presented Glenn Ligon America, a mid-career retrospective of his work that traveled nationally. Other important recent shows include Grief and Grievance at the New Museum, where Ligon acted as a curatorial advisor, Des Parisiens Noirs at the Musée d'Orsay, Paris, Blue Black from 2017, an exhibition he curated at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation in St. Louis, and Glenn Ligon Encounters and Collisions, a curatorial project organized with Nottingham Contemporary and Tate Liverpool. Ligon has been the subject of solo museum exhibitions at the Camden Art Center in London, the Power Plant in Toronto, the Walker here in Minneapolis, and the Studio Museum in Harlem, among others. His work has been included in major international exhibitions, including the Venice Biennale, the Berlin Biennale, the Istanbul Biennial, Documenta, and Gwangju. Glenn Ligon's work is held in permanent collections of museums worldwide, including the Tate Modern London, Centre Pompidou in Paris, the Museum of Modern Art New York, the Whitney, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, SF MoMA, Art Institute of Chicago, and the Walker, among many others. His awards and honors include a John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship and the Studio Museum's Joyce Alexander Wien Artist Prize. And that brings us to our moderator today, Kemi Ilesanmi, who we're also thrilled to welcome here to the Walker. Kemi Ilesanmi is executive director of the Laundromat Project, a Brooklyn-based organization that advances artists and neighbors as change agents in their own communities. With 20 years of experience in the cultural arena, Kemi is inspired by the immense possibilities for joyful justice at the intersection of arts and community. Prior to joining the LP, she was director of grants and services at Creative Capital Foundation, where she supported the work of American artists making adventurous new work. From 1998 to 2004, she was a visual arts curator here at the Walker Art Center. While here, she organized several exhibitions, including the Squared Circle, Boxing and Contemporary Art, and also ran the Visual Arts Residency Program. In 2015, Kemi was appointed by the mayor of New York City to the Cultural Affairs Advisory Commission and has served as chair since 2020. Observer included her on the Arts Power 50 list in 2020. She has also been honored by the Metropolitan Museum and Project for Empty Space and serves on the boards of the Joan Mitchell Foundation, Smith College Museum of Art, and the Broad Room, as well as advisory boards for the Brooklyn Public Library, Black Arts Future Fund, Indigo Arts Alliance, and WNET All Arts. A graduate of Smith College, NYU, and Choral Leadership New York, Kemi is also a Sterling Network Fellow. And to begin today's program, we'll hear a bit of background on this show from Christine Y. Kim, curator of contemporary art at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, who, with Rujeko Hockley at the Whitney in New York, has curated this major touring exhibition. It's been a great pleasure to work with Christine and Ru as we configured this exhibition for the Walker. Christine's been curator at LACMA from 2010 to the present. Some of her projects during her tenure there include a James Turrell exhibition in 2013, a major show with Diana Thader in 2015, and she's currently at work on a new exhibition, Black American Portraits, which opens next month. Christine was also part of the curatorial team at the Studio Museum in Harlem from 2000 to 2008, where she co-curated a number of important shows, including Freestyle in 2001, which included Mehretu's work, Frequency and Flow, among others, and ran the Artist in Residence program there, which launched the careers of artists such as Julie, Kehinde Wiley, Mickalene Thomas, Wengechi Mutu, Sanford Biggers, and others. We're really delighted to have Christine joining us here today. So to begin, I hope you will join me in welcoming to the stage Christine Y. Kim. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siri. And thank you, Mary Cerruti, the board of the Walker, the staff, the family, and the community here in Minneapolis. This has been such an extraordinary experience for myself, and I'll speak for Rue as well. Siri, you have been a champion of this exhibition from the moment we started talking about it, and it really shows in the care and the attention, the beautiful installation that you have here. As you mentioned, as Siri mentioned before, this is the last stop on a 4-city tour. The show started at LACMA, and then it traveled to the High in Atlanta, then went to the Whitney, and is now here. And of course, traveling a major exhibition of this scale during a pandemic is quite a challenge and quite a feat. And it ending in Minneapolis is significant, is meaningful, symbolic, and emotional. Of course, there are things that we know about from the time of organizing this exhibition, the extraordinary East African immigrant communities here in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area, but a lot of things that also that no one really could predict would happen during this touring exhibition. The murder of George Floyd, sparking nationwide and global protest movements, and the sort of creative, political, and social expression around racial justice that we've seen and we hope to continue seeing. And I think a lot of the things in Julie's work around visual and linguistic neologisms, sort of creative ways of expression and interrogation as well as interlocution that happens in the work. And in the work itself, it comes through with an analysis of the ways that people in past civilizations as well as today, sort of congregate, move through space, bodies moving through space, protest culture, climate change, globalization, and all the way that all of these things sort of coalesce in our kind of vibrate within our bodies, within our societies throughout time and space. And it's so beautifully articulated here. Siri asked me to tell a bit of the origin story, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but as she mentioned, Julie came through the Artist in Residence program at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 2000 and 2001. And that was, without Julie and I knowing, was really the start of working on this exhibition. The conversations that we had in the studio, Julie, way back when, and had, again, no idea that it would lead to this extraordinary show and experience for all of us. But thinking and talking about 9/11, Islamophobia, the repercussions from that, and really moving through the years from that point onward. Julie came out to Los Angeles with her family, who's here today, in 2013, and we walked through the James Turrell retrospective that I co-curated with Michael Govan. And in the exhibition, there on the object labels, there were suggested times that one should be in each of the immersive installations. Not all of them, but most of them, because there is a certain duration that your eyes adjust, that your bodies adjust, that literally your skin adjusts to being in these spaces. And it led us to a conversation around painting and the possibilities around painting in creating different, expanding, contracting, creating different sort of registers and timeframes for being sort of entering into the space of a painting. And so in thinking about this and thinking about, that was 2013. So as you can tell, we've been working on talking about and thinking about this show for quite some time. So many conversations have been illuminating. We've been around the world looking at paintings in public and private collections. And when Rue came on board a few years after that, it was really this extraordinary synergy that has led to all of this. You are really in for a treat today, a conversation between Julie Mehretu, Glenn Ligon, moderated by Kemi, three extraordinary thinkers, cultural producers, and makers whose work I respect deeply. And with that, I will hand it off to Kemi, Glenn, and Julie. Thank you so much.
Welcome and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for just all of that to begin to feed us this afternoon. I'm hoping for a really beautiful conversation and couldn't be more thrilled to be back here. Again, as introduced, I'm Kemi Ilesanmi, and it's been 17 years since I've been on this stage, and it's a really moving moment for me. So I feel incredibly lucky to have been invited to be in conversation and community with these two incredible artists that I've known and followed and loved for many decades at this point. And you're among the most trenchantly insightful and relevant artists of our time. So really excited for this conversation. And thank you and congratulations to Julie and Glenn and Siri and Matthew and Mary and the whole Walker team. Christine, Rue, thank you so much for this gift. Just an incredible gift for our enjoyment and edification through the work. Julie, incredible. Just a stunner. So thank you and congratulations on this beautiful mid-career survey. So both Glenn and Julie, as you heard, have special relationships and history of the Walker, and I wanted to just tell you a little bit about that. And some of that time actually crossed over with my time here at the Walker in the late 90s and early aughties. So I first met Glenn in 1999 when I was a young Walker intern and he was artist in residence. And it was such a magical journey to be invited to go with an artist on a journey of curiosity about learning about this city, which was the invitation to come to the Walker, connect with the Walker, everything that we had to offer inside the building, but much more importantly, what the city and the Twin Cities had to offer outside the building. So there were three parts to Glenn's residency. He was quickly drawn to the wonderful Givens collection of African American literature at the University of Minnesota. I still remember walking through those stacks and was incredibly thrilled. Glenn took those book covers, those books, and particularly focused on the covers to create a wonderful exhibition as a meditation on words, images, politics, and meaning in a way that only Glenn can and continues to do as a curator. He also, and here are a couple of other images, and he also worked with the Walker Teen Arts Council of those years, circa 2000, 2001-ish, engaging them in discussions of reproduction, sampling, Warhol, and more, and inviting them, in fact, while riffing on those ideas, to create their own artwork. So what you're actually seeing on the walls are the artwork they created in relationship to those discussions, including a piece featuring Jean Benet as in the style of Warhol's 16 Jackies. Let's see. Here's another one of the book covers. There's that. All of these were done by the Teen Arts Council students, high school students. And lastly, Glenn himself started an entirely new painting series, transforming the vibrant, here's him with the teens, and uninhibited coloring sheets of a group of young, preschoolers, Minneapolis preschoolers, taking the works that they had created to create these paintings, which became the basis for the exhibition Coloring in 2000. The upstairs gallery. And here's baby Julie. Turning to Julie, she and I met around the same time, so roughly 20 years ago at the Project, Christian Hayes' influential Harlem gallery that operated in the late 90s and aughties. Both of us were shiny and new to the scene. Like so many, I was immediately drawn and intrigued and impressed by her work, her mind, and her spirit. You can see her alive, and you can see that spirit right there. Not too long afterwards, Douglas Fogel invited her to be part of his 2001 painting exhibition here at the Walker called Painting at the Edge of the World. Some of you might remember. And then shortly after that, the curatorial team came together and decided we would love to work with Julie as an artist in residence to, again, invite her into the institution, but also so that we could learn new things about the city we were in. And Julie was immediately drawn to the new Americans who were really recently emigrated to this country and to this city from East Africa. And she created a residency project called Minneapolis and St. Paul, our East African cities. She invited young people, mainly from Edison High School, to mostly high school students, to document their own lives through writing, photography, and sound recordings. These are their equipment. And these materials became the basis of a beautiful interactive website. So you can see how that functioned. And all the materials generated in the project later entered the permanent collection of the Minnesota Historical Society. You can actually go there right now and research that material. And when you interacted with the website, you actually came up with your own Julie Mehretu painting. Her residency was capped with the exhibition Drawing into Painting. Here's a couple more images, one of the students' images, and another. Beautiful, beautiful. This painting is now in the exhibition upstairs, but this is it in circa 2003. So this was Drawing into Painting was the name of the exhibition. It was Julie's first solo museum exhibition. Really beautiful show, really proud to have worked on that and co-curated that with Douglas Fogel. At the time, Douglas wrote, Mehretu charts a visual course that not only speaks to the tragic aspect of history, but also to its moment of liberation and freedom. That still holds true today in really engaging with the work, and we'll get to talk about that. I'll let her tell you the story shortly, but suffice it to say that she and Glenn crossed paths here during that time period. The Walker, as many of you would know, has been and it continues to be a place that diligently works to make those kinds of meetings possible, along with being a place where new ideas and experiments and art is fervently nurtured. Fast forward to now, Julie and Glenn continue to map and explore issues of power, identity, contested histories, and so much more across media, spaces, institutions, and geographies. And we'll get to dive into all of that now. Thank you. Hello, hello. So I had, so again, congratulations.
Thank you,
This is
Kemi.
incredible. Thank you for
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was great.
Thank you, Glenn, for joining this conversation. I actually wanted to start with a quote by Glenn about you. He has written about you among the many incredible writings that he's done, inviting us into new ways to understand the world and to understand art. Julie is the painter I turn to when I want to think about how to trouble the line between abstraction and figuration, between local and global concerns, between painterly restraint and joyous abandon. She's a history painter and an Afrofuturist all at the same time. So just to kind of ground us and pull both of you into this moment, when did you each become aware of each other's work? And we talked about this a teeny bit. And how do you remember actually meeting in real life? Because you probably met the work before you met the person.
I got to see your work before me, so I get to go first.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for flying here today to be a part of this conversation. And Kemi, thank you also for taking this on and putting so much thought and effort into it. Also, thank you to Christine and Siri and Mary and the entire crew here for the amazing last couple weeks and the massive support of the show. Basically, I saw Glenn's work when I first came to New York, and I was a waiter at or wait person at coffee shop, and I went to the Whitney Biennial, not the Whitney Biennial, the Black Male Show. It was like just as I came to the city, and I was like, this is what like work can be like. And I, it blew me away because I'd just come from Michigan, and I think the most radical shows I'd seen before that were at the Philadelphia Art Museum, like when the Cy Twombly thing was installed. So when I saw that, the entire show blew me away, and it laid down this kind of gauntlet of what could happen. Mm. And I remember so clearly that room of your work in that, and the power of the text and the images and the photographs. And so and then since then, Glenn has been such an important artist all the time that I was through school, kind of one of the markers of what I always thought of as a really incredibly astute conceptual thinker, but also someone where the work had this tactile and beautiful kind of engagement. And so I was really attracted to like how the work pulled one in, but at the same time has this kind of rigorous kind of thinking behind it. And I just again got goosebumps with Colored, and as a concept and as an exhibition and the work that went behind that. So it's been something. And then Jessica, when I met Jessica, you were basically one of her favorite artists, as was one of mine. And so we were really starstruck when we met you. And so when I first saw your show here, yes. It was the first show that I saw when I came for my first visit. Your show was up here before you showed the paintings in New York. And so that's my earliest memories of you. And then at the project.
Right. And I'm trying to think, did we...
And with Thelma.
Yes. So we probably met at the Studio Museum when you were having your residency. Yeah. I feel like that's the first time we actually met. And what's interesting, I mean, thank you for the very kind comments, but and maybe I'll tell this story later on. But I keep looking at your work, and I do this sort of thing when I'm standing in front of your paintings, and I say, WWJD, what would Julie do when I'm thinking about how to solve certain problems in my work? And with this show in particular, I realized that I've gotten a lot of solutions for things by looking at your work and thinking about the panoramic nature of it, but also thinking about it formally and the tools that you use to make it. And, well, I might as well just tell this now.
Please.
There's a Tacitadine film in the show. And I was looking at it today, and I was trying to remember, which part of this, when is it going to come up? And I didn't sit all the way through it to see this part come up. But there's a part where you're, I think, sitting on the floor maybe, and you're just kind of looking up at the painting, and you make this little kind of triangle or square. It's kind of like when somebody's, it's a very painter thing. Like you make this little square, and then you look at the work, and you kind of figure out, does this section work? Does this section work? And then there's another scene where, and maybe this isn't even in Tacitus' film. Now I'm thinking about it, which is why I didn't see it. But anyway, I saw this somewhere. And there's another part where you're on the computer and you're looking at images of the painting. And I realized, you can make additions to a painting from an image on a computer before you make it on the painting. Which seems obvious, but I had never done it.
Really?
And I went back to the studio and started doing that. And I was like, wow.
A revelation.
It's like camera obscura. It's all of a sudden, it's like...
Yeah, because normally I would just I just stencil up there, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, I'm screwed. But suddenly that became available as a tool. So thank you for that insight, but also thank you just for the work in general.
Thank you. I mean, I remember so clearly at the Studio Museum, Glenn and Lorna and Thelma at the table and feeling completely awestruck, but also nervous. And then now we've become friends and for the last 20 years or so. And it was just such an amazing time.
Such an amazing time and great stories. I'm hoping to hear more. I had a couple things I might come back to there, but before I wanted to ground us again in where we are. Particularly because of your remarks last night, Julie, at the dinner, thinking about why you felt having the show come to Minneapolis felt so important to you, both from your own personal history and connection to the Walker, and even from childhood, I learned last night, as well as, of course, this moment and the way Minneapolis has played on the global stage because of the murder of George Floyd, and the opportunities even for this city to kind of show a new direction for us. And I wanted you to just share a little bit about that, because it felt very special in particular to why this place matters.
Yeah, I think Minneapolis is in the public consciousness in a very crucial and potent way, especially because of the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. Mm-hmm. We have had other murders like that and as part of the public, but the entire public was paying attention to this. Mm-hmm. I think a large part because of the pandemic and no sports, and there was nothing else. You either watched the news and this was that, right? And so it became this, and it was so horrific that it took everyone by storm. And what the reaction to that here in this city and what that led to across the country, and as you mentioned globally, is just part of who we are now, and the opportunity that this city has in the next few weeks to really make a choice up on defunding the police, or reimagining what the police and what security and what health services could be as something in this city. And so we are all looking to Minneapolis as a way to lead these efforts of real change in terms of security and public good. And I think that for me to be here during this time, it just felt really potent. Of course, none of this was what we were thinking about before. But when I grew up, this was the only contemporary arts institution in the Midwest, and one of the only really strong contemporary art, one of the first and early contemporary art institutions in this country. And I think that that says something and is really important. And I wasn't that young when I really realized that. I was a little bit older, but I knew of the Walker as this Museum of Contemporary Art, and so it's always had this incredible reputation. And for someone and a young artist growing up in the Midwest or in the South or in other places that aren't the two coastal art centers, these museums and these contexts are so important and so generative and so instructive. So for me to be a part of that, it was really important to us when we were deciding areas of where we'd like the show. This was, and plus this was the institution that had my first show, and the immense support and the outreach into community in this city was also impressive 20 years ago or 19 years ago.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I was really moved last night. And kind of continuing a little bit on that theme. So the beauty and the opportunity, of course, of having a mid-career survey is to kind of see the breadth and the shifts and the changes and also the through lines in work. And I remember your show at the Whitney, just being able to kind of follow that. So politics, obviously, place, context, identity, geopolitics, history, all of those for both of you show up in your work over and over again, have been there since the beginning and continue to show up. But they also, the ways you engage may have shifted. And I'd love to hear just what keeps you engaged with those big issues and topics in your work still. And I say this with much reverence and respect that you both have careers of decades, not counted in years, but counted in decades. And how amazing is that? And to be able to learn and grow as a person and an artist and have all of that show up in the work. So how is that even showing up in the aesthetic choices you make? What keeps you engaged in issues of politics? And I want you both to answer this, and maybe we'll give Julie a break and go to Glenn for a second.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to think about, because I want to go back to Julie a little bit, because walking through the show today, I was thinking about the question of ground. Paintings that I've made start out, a gesso ground, and then I work on top of it. But I realized walking through the show today that the ground that Julie starts on is architecture, is protest, is, she doesn't start on a neutral ground. And that's super interesting to me, that a lot of times when I go to public events now, there are land acknowledgements of First Nations. So we become aware that we have to acknowledge that folks were here before we were here, acknowledgement of the ground and who was here. And I feel like I see that in Julie's painting, acknowledgement that the ground, in a bigger sense that we walk on, has to do with politics, has to do with history, is international, is not just about the United States, to talk about, the uprising in Egypt is to talk about the United States as well. We're involved in that. And so that notion of like the ground that we make our work on, a lot of people ignore that, but I think that's a really interesting and important place to start from. But in my work, it's always started from text, I guess, which I guess is why in some ways I go back to, say, James Baldwin's Stranger in the Village is an essay I've come back to over and over again, because his sense in that essay is so panoramic. He's in Switzerland in the 50s. He's thinking about the fact that he is, for many of these villagers in this little mountain village that he's found himself in, the first Black person that they have seen. But he talks about that, the specificity of that moment, of that encounter, what it means to be a stranger, but he also talks about Europe's relationship to its former colonies in Africa. He talks about his relationship to the civil rights movement and his place in America. He talks about his relationship to European culture. So the essay is panoramic. So to use that text for me is kind of like akin to what Julie's doing. Like, it's the ground that I'm standing on which the work is built on top of. Yeah.
That's so beautifully put. Yeah, it's amazing. And I was actually thinking that when you were talking about the kind of social ground of the different kinds of contexts, for me, they become this point of departure. And the blurred image was really a way to really almost have this kind of this space where it's being informed by this photograph that's unrecognizable, but is a point, is kind of a nod or like is that social ground. But I love the way you talk about that. And as you were describing that, I was thinking, it feels to me like the text is that social ground, even when the text becomes completely obliterated and illegible. And in that illegibility, that feels like part of that social ground as well, like that the kind of. But also, just as you said that, I feel, what was the exact quote? I feel myself most colored when thrown against the sharp white
feel
background.
most colored when thrown against a sharp white background. The quote from Zora Neale Hurston.
Which
text.
is such, so I was thinking about that work, and we were in Aspen one year with Christian Hay, and he walked out of a restaurant and said, "How you doing?" He goes, and he just said that quote.
He meant all that snow.
He meant all the snow. Yeah, I feel most colored when thrown against. So anyway, but I think also it's really, for me, a big part of painting is the investigation in painting and the commitment to this material. Like, there's always something that comes out of working that is process oriented, and through that there's something else I want to investigate, and that starts nagging at me, and then I start to think about it, and I can't really and it's the figuring it out. Like, and you never really figure it out. That's the thing about making art, is that it's not, you figure things out more when you talk in groups and study together or something, but you get something that you're not expecting, or one does, and then to me it's that unexpected invention or emergence of something else that you weren't expecting that becomes that has a kind of relativeness or potency about something that becomes a turning point. And for me, that's kind of, it's almost the chasing the dragon, like in terms of trying to get that experience again. And so that's, I think, what keeps me painting. And then, but the sense of like engagement within the studio and then the rest of the world is, I think, how you described it very much. So beautifully put.
Yes, the ground, right? Like, really, that sense, really beautiful. And it made something there, and what you even brought up earlier makes me think about the place of mistakes as portals and failure as portals, And Glenn actually spoke to a few of our artists at the LP, the Laundromat Project, a few months ago, and talked about even your text paintings. Your original intent was to make them super legible.
Right.
And a mistake opened the portal for what we now know is this
Right.
play, this peekaboo with legibility. I'd love to hear how mistakes have been portals. Failure has been a portal.
Well, I think it's one's unconscious working. As my friend Greg Wardowitz says, the typo in the text message is your unconscious working, or autocorrect. That's what he says. Autocorrect is your unconscious working. But the sense that I feel like for me, I make work to figure out things rather than I've figured something out and then I make the work. So those mistakes are the part of figuring out the work, But also I find that the better ideas come from those mistakes, The thing I'm trying to do, I'm trying really hard to make nice, clean text, and then I realize that, oil stick through letter stencils does not make nice, clean text, but actually the disintegration of language through this repetition is way more interesting than just presenting the text, because the text is out in the world. It's a quotation. So you don't need to read it in my painting directly. It's out in the world. The painting wants to do something else. And so figuring out what that something else is often triggered by the mistake, And it's across mediums. I've told this story before, but when I started making neons, I went to a neon shop and this guy was showing me all these things he's done, projects worked on, and I said, I make black and white text paintings, so what about black neon? And he's like, absence of light, Glenn, But then he showed me a sign he'd made for Burberry's that had a white neon tube with a black stripe on the front because Burberry's plaid has a black stripe. And I thought, yes. My joke has turned into work. So that first neon, Negro Sunshine, with a quote from Gertrude Stein, came from that stupid comment.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
You both work... Remember to...
That's such an amazing story. My mind is blown. Absence of light.
There, Glenn. Materials have shifted over time. Just that journey with different themes that you've used, from spray guns to sumi ink to acrylic to neon to oil sticks and coal dust and all the things. I would love to hear, because again, going through just being able to see different ways you shifted with both material and color and all of that. Julie, would love to hear just a little bit about that. Your journey with materials, your attraction to certain things, and the doing and the making.
Again, I think that comes, at least it came from me through an effort of trying and not things not succeeding and trying again. And early, really one thing just led to another. So the earliest works with the works on paper, I wanted to make a material in paint that looked like Mylar, but was much more translucent than Mylar, so I could really build layers. And then later, I was started to pour that material so I could make larger paintings, and then eventually spray that material. Like another artist taught me how to use a compressor and spray the material. And then I wanted the material to be less sandy looking or have less silica and that yellow kind of color, that aged color. I wanted to eliminate that so you could really, have more control over the color. And so I had to figure out a new material for that. And, whatever, like if it was like that I needed to learn how to mask something or how I didn't know how to draw architectural drawing. I never had done that. I hadn't studied it. And learning how to trace and how to do that properly and all the mistakes that I made. And then if you look at some of the drawings I used to do and some of the drawings some of the amazing artists I work with can do, it's like pretty phenomenal. Pay attention to that in the show. But I think like It's really about like understanding technology. When you talked about the computer, like learning how to use the computer for me. When I first started working with the computer, it was the most rudimentary, kind of like Illustrator programs, and being able to learn how to work with Photoshop differently, how to translate that with screen printing or whatever. Like all of these different techniques come though out of like mistakes or ways like one of the reasons I started to work in the computer is because I wanted to see my paintings at a small scale, and I couldn't do that in my studios. They were too small. The Studio Museum was, small. And then and my paintings would take up the whole wall. So then I would have to like find a way, and I was using mirrors, and then I started using photographs. But this was before iPhone, so we didn't have the ease of. And I remember when we first were able to like draw on an iPad, write on a photograph, how it changed something so fun.
Yes.
So these kinds of things. So technology, but also the ways that assistants bring in a different type of technology and knowledge and way of talent, and how that can be morphed in the work and conceptually with the work. All of that becomes like we're different generative kind of projects that shifted, like the material and the way that I could make the work over time.
That made your comment just now about, kind of the smallness of early studios and not being able to, kind of get into the work in that way. I'm very aware of my body in a lot of the paintings, right? The bigger work in particular, right? So there's a way that it's embodied my experience of the work. It's not just my eyes doing the work. There's my body, like there's that relationship. And I'm curious, is that something that just came with the work? Was that something you wanted to come with the work? How do you think about the body in relationship to the work?
That was really important. There was a conscious decision to move from a small painting that you could see the whole map. And there's small paintings in this show, like earlier paintings, where you could really see the whole painting from, even when you're up close to it. Even the paintings that were done at the Studio Museum, the first early paintings that the Walker purchased, you can really, even though there's so much stuff and so much drawing and little events, you still can see the whole image. And I wanted that physical relationship with the work where where you do have an embodied relationship with the work, and you become immersed in the work in a very, very different way, and where you can't see the whole painting at once, where the painting does shatter into other small invents. And so the only way you can understand the whole painting is from that distance. But also, I think a big driver in my work is the kind of thinking of embodied experience and how different that is. And how different that is within cultural groups and within whatever, however you think of culture or how you think of the creation of culture. Like black embodied experience is very different than any other East African embodied experience is very different than African American embodied experience. And like these, the coming to the work, like there is this, you bring that with you, with the experience of any visual work, anything we engage with. And whether that's a Robert Ryman or, Ellsworth Kelly, or like I'm trying to think of the most Barnett Newmans, to like really like Frank Bowling or your work or Kara Walker, and you have these very different types of experiences within that. And so I was always I think that's just something that was always very important to me, but also that I realized and didn't want to ignore.
I love that. Glenn, I'd love to hear about that idea of embodiment and engaging with your work, from everything from the neon to, I know you're working on a giant Stranger Paradise piece right now that has that kind of panoramic.
Right.
And you've been talking about the panoramic. So just...
Yeah. Well, I think it's always interesting, that question in relationship to text, because text is, if you see a text, you want to read it. And in my paintings, that's often frustrated. So there's a kind of, that's built into the work. That's part of what the work experience is, this kind of difficulty and illegibility and the frustration around that. So that's one thing I'm always thinking about, like the viewer's going to be frustrated. But the text is out in the world. So and with the advent of, Google, that those source materials are very easily found now. But I still find, this question of scale, which is interesting in Julie's work, because I was upstairs in the gallery and watching people look at her work and realizing, it's hard to find, the point where you should stand in Julie's, in relationship to her paintings, because that's not what it's about. It's not about like the artist telling you, this is the point, stand here. This is how I want you to see my painting. And so I just watch people move around, get 20 feet away, get really up close. And there's the kind of like refusal of a kind of mastery of like, you can see the whole painting if you get far enough back. But if you get far enough back, you miss the details, you know? And that's what's the beauty of that work is for me, is that it's micro and macro at the same time, but those two things work beautifully together. And they change too, you know? Like, so when I got 20 feet back, I was like, oh, those stripes that I hadn't perceived so well when I was up close now create this enormous space in this painting, you know, which I hadn't seen when I was closer. I saw them as being something on the surface rather than being something in depth in space. And so that's super interesting. And the painting you're referring to, there's one up now in a show in Zurich, and there's one coming for a show in New York. It is the entire text of Baldwin's Stranger in the Village essay. The font size is, I think it's 1.5 inches is the font. And the font size, like this. And the font size determines, if you use the entire text, determines the size of the painting. So the painting's 10 by 45 feet, and it's the biggest painting I've ever made. And it's quite ironic in some ways because it's the end of a series. And I think now I sort of think like, you know, a younger artist would start with the entire text, and it took me 20 years to get to that. But it's really about feeling, you know, I've always used fragments of Baldwin, and I think it was because Baldwin was intimidating to me, and he's still intimidating in some ways, but I also feel like it was important for me at the end of this series to tackle the entire text, and that meant working on a painting on that scale. And so it doesn't look like a page, where my other paintings have sort of referenced the page format, you know, a rectangle. This is, 45 feet long. So it's a landscape, essentially.
Absolutely.
And so it's exciting to me. I mean, I was watching, I think it was Art 21, and Julie's talking about the painting that's in SF MoMA and how excited you were about the possibilities of other work by having done a painting like that on that enormous scale. And that was sort of, I was thinking about that when I was making this stranger painting in my studio. And it was a pain in the ass, to work with something on that scale. Can't even get it out the door, like can't get far back from it. And it presents other kinds of painting problems I've never had to deal with because I have never worked on that scale. But it's also really exciting for me, even though I know it's the end of this investigation, I see other possibilities for other series through working this way. Yeah.
I love that.
Oh, I can't wait to see that.
I know.
Yeah,
I
me
can't
too.
Wait. Just one thing you brought up, which I didn't ever think about before, but the idea of frustration in viewing and time-based viewing. And I think that something about painting is really, and what Christine was talking about with the Ryman show, there's this importance of painting is really a time-based experience. It's not something that you can just see and get, like you can a photo on Instagram. Like it just doesn't work that way. And although tons of painting is consumed that way, it's really not. You realize when you haven't seen a whole film, you realize like you only saw a section of it, so there's probably a bunch you missed. But a lot of people don't think about that with painting. But the truth, that's really the truth. Like when you spend time with the Night Watchman, that painting actually shifts in space and things emerge from one another and you see things you don't see when you just first approach the painting. So and I think frustration in viewing is part of that, is part of that learning process, is part of the kind of, I can't really tell what I'm doing or I'm not quite sure where to be. And so then you study more or you look more or you engage with it more. And there's something super interesting to me about when you said the kind of the breakdown of the text. It can be somewhat of a frustrating the viewer process. And then I thought about what you said about not knowing where to look at these paintings or what can you see from where. Even though that to me was like what was like illuminating or kind of not illuminating but instructive, and in terms of when that happened for me, that from a distance I couldn't see what I was doing, but from up close it was something completely different. I became really interested in that, but that is frustrating as well. So that's just an interesting.
But I think that makes the painting so rewarding, is that you can keep coming back to them. I mean, we were talking, about Jack Whitten. There was a painting at Museum of Modern Art called Etopolis for Glissant.
Like a masterpiece.
Masterpiece painting, and you and I both love that
Yeah.
painting. And I was saying that when I was a younger artist, I would go to MoMA to look at a specific de Kooning over and over again. And now I go to MoMA to look at that Jack Whitten. But you can only look at the Jack Whitten if it's up.
And they just took it down.
Yeah, and they just took it down and put up your painting.
Details.
Hello. Literally the same wall. But my point is that, you know,
seen that. I didn't see that.
It's amazing. And the Terry Atkins sculpture in front of it. So amazing. Anyway, but the idea is like, I kept going back to look at that Whitten, you know, every couple of months, which is why I said, like, has to be up for you to go look at it, you know. The Kooning's always up. It's like, put up the Jack Whitten for a long time. So that's great, you know. That's a new kind of thing in museums where artists of color are on long-term view and normalized in that way, you know. But every time I go back and looked at that Jack Whitten painting, I would learn something new. I was like, oh, there's green glitter at the top there. Never saw it. Oh, the background black is totally this matte paint that I don't, what? You know, like learning that over time has been really exciting and instructive for me. And it's what you're saying. It's like you go look at Rembrandt's Night Watchman and you keep going back and you see something new in it. And I think great work does that, allows that to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, I feel that way too. And one thing about your work too that I'm thinking about, sorry, Kemi, we'll go back to the question. But just in terms of that is also how you've revisited particular texts, like you were talking about Stranger in the Village and certain sections of that. But then that canceled print, like I go back to the canceled print that you did, which is like when you cancel a plate, you put an X through it, and then it's no longer print that. Whereas, can you describe your piece rather than me because you're here? Because you did two versions of it, and I lived with the canceled print.
Right. It's
phenomenal.
Zora Neale Hurston text. Not remembering what it says.
Something about feeling colored.
Yeah, I feel most color. I think it's that text.
It is that
and
text.
Initially, these were black and white prints, and I just took that plate, printed it in white, and put an X through it. So that was the cancellation, is the X through the etching plate. But we printed that. So it's
A piece.
It's a piece of this text that's there and not there because it's been canceled. And one of the things I was thinking about is sort of what I was thinking about with Baldwin. Baldwin's everywhere now, everywhere. Everybody quotes him, movie, the documentary, I Am Not Your Negro. He's everywhere. But when I started using Baldwin, I was in a art program, Whitney Museum program, and I told my studio mate there that all this psychoanalytic theory we were having to read and all these Foucault, all the Co's, you know, Charcot, Foucault, all the Co's, was like a headbanger for me. And as a palate cleanser, I was reading James Baldwin, and my studio mate turned to me and was like, James Baldwin, who's that? And I thought, oh, it's not the problem that you've never read James Baldwin. The problem is you never heard the name. But that's not possible now. I feel like the world has changed. But I'm interested, you know, when using a Zora Neale.
Surprised. Remember when Donald Trump was asked about Frederick Douglass?
Oh,
He's still alive.
So many great
alive.
You'd be
things
surprised.
recently. Yeah. Okay. Well.
This actually makes me think one of the topics that we talked about was just the importance of producing knowledge, and you were part of what moved Baldwin into a different space, right? And the weight and the responsibility and the joy and the possibilities of producing knowledge, and particularly as Black folks, and our relationships to knowledge and barriers to knowledge, and the misunderstandings of when we bring knowledge. Knowledge has always been there, but not always recognized. And I think you both engage with the idea of producing new knowledge, making new knowledge. So the symposium, of course, the work itself. So let's just say that. Yeah. Then like the symposium you just did around the convening around Black queer abstract at the Whitney. Glenn, you write, you curate, you know, you really are out there making knowledge and making it visible from your particular perspectives. What is it about that attracts you? Why is that important? And it's, you know, Carrie Mae Weems and Simone Lee. There seems to be this interest in kind of very intentionally creating context, knowledge, and going down on record. And I wanted to hear a little bit about that. I see you nodding a lot. Okay.
Well, I mean, I think like when you study from that, right? Yeah. So in participating with any kind of past and engaging with that, you want to also generate and participate and debate that and then study that communally. And I think about this. What you're bringing up makes me think about this piece that Femi. What's her last name? Olujemi. She's a jazz writer. She's a poet and jazz writer. Her name will come to me. Just give me a second. But she wrote this really wonderful piece about the community and the sense of the collective in jazz, not the solo, not the focus on the solo and the kind of premise, the importance of the solo, but the way that musicians participate in creating the context together, and the repetition of music, the way that different musicians play each other's songs as part of this effort of this participating in this community and participating in this communitarian kind of art form. And so she really talks about jazz as a collective art form and the way of making and playing as being part of that, like participating, even the solo as participating in that. So rather than focusing on the single artist or the genius moment, but that there's this constant weaving in and out of the two. And also not just as its form, but as a form of resistance and forms of new invention. And I feel like that's what it's like. That's what Denniston Hill comes from. That's what painting comes from. That's what reading comes from. Or when you're a young student, it's this kind of constant absorption. And then if you're starting to participate, whether it's through writing or conversation, through form making, through studying collectively, that to me is the richest place of engagement. And that's one of the reasons I love being able to go into museums to look at shows, is as much as I want to see museums shift and become more and more decolonial, how do they are such important sites of study for all of us who want to collect where you can't necessarily travel. The Met was the place that I would go during the pandemic. And I could go to wherever in that place and study immense amounts. So there's that. And then there's also kind of what happens when you're reading. And, I'm in a reading group with really great people, and we study that together. But there's this generative place of that engagement. And I think politics and representation is an important part of that, because that story about James Baldwin, that you're, in a very high level of, the independent study program is a conceptual, rigorous program. You would think anyone would know James Baldwin at that time, who was at that level of study. And I think that, so I do think there's something about, understanding how much, when you're in a collective or in a community, how little so few people know about certain areas that are like embodied parts of who you are, and that you assume that it. So I think it's also about this generative place of contributing to that community and to that layering.
I love the idea of contributing to community, right? So, Glenn, what makes you decide to write an essay about a particular artist or to curate a show about a particular idea? How does that fit into everything else you do?
Well, I think it's a way of getting out of my head, and getting into someone else's head. So writing about an artist is a way of thinking about their work deeply, because often, I think I know this artist's work. And then when you have to write about it, you have to articulate what you think you know, and you realize some of what you know is maybe wrong or, not formed well enough. So the writing becomes a way of thinking deeply about their work. But also I think this is an interesting moment now, because with a show like Julie, with Carrie Mae Weems' show, the Guggenheim, these convenings, which were generated by the artists, the museums have provided the space, but the artists are in the dialogues with the scholars and other artists and brought them and invited them together to do a conversation in public that they have in private, or a conversation that they have through, I read Fred Moten's work. I'm amazed if my name comes out of his mouth, at a lecture, and but it's thinking about Saidiya Hartman, Alfred Moten, that's generating ideas for my work. And so it's amazing to see artists taking control of the discourse that they want to put out in the world by inviting those people into these public conversations, and imparting that kind of knowledge, producing that kind of knowledge and documenting it in some way. So I'm sure this had happened before, but I think in the institutional space, particularly with artists of color, that impulse feels different somehow, or new somehow.
A different level of intention and weight. There's something there that's happening. It's been really amazing. It's such a gift, right, that you guys are doing that. So thank you. And thinking about institutions, so the Walker has been and continues to be a really generative place for incubation and experimentation. You learned, we learned, all of that happened. I know that the Walker, the Whitney, and the Studio Museum have been really important institutions for you and your careers over time. So I'm just kind of parking that to say that. And then I'm going to segue actually to thinking about an institution you are building and made quick reference to. We have some slides. Denison Hill, which you founded it with Paul Pfeiffer and Lawrence Chua in 2004. Yeah, somewhere in there. So going on 20 years, you're approaching high teens. So you're building an institution. You're building a thing. You're supporting other artists. You're creating a space where that happens. And we've partnered with you. LP artists have been there. There's so many incredible artists that have been through that space, and see it as a place of nurturing. So I'd love to hear just what has that been like to be by the way, congratulations, Julie is now on the board of the Whitney, just got announced. And Glenn also on several amazing boards. You guys are showing up in a whole variety of ways is what I want to really pull up. And then in this case for Denison Hill, again, going on 20 years, you have been creating space very actively. That is its own kind of helping knowledge happen.
But I think that comes from the necessity of those spaces. And I think the reason that you see, there's a lot of us now that are engaging in the public art world in a way that's more central than in the past. And I think that whether it's curators at institutions, leaders of institutions, people on boards, creating new types of spaces that we need, it all comes because there has been a vacuum of that. And so it's in many ways, we're just doing what's required to maintain and develop more space and allow for more diversity, more types of possibilities to exist in this frame and discourse. And I think the one space where you really don't have that is in criticism. I think that's where we're really missing it. Outside of you and some other artists, I think that's something that's really, that we need to try and find a way to invest in and develop. And I think, so the DH actually grew out of all of us as artists, working up there, living up there, making work, being in conversation with one another and wanting to continue that and not wanting what we saw happen, which is log cabin kind of structures starting to pop up. And we didn't want this whole area fully suburbanized or, not really thought about how it would develop and evolve. So we really then tried to think through how could we create and insist on an artist colony, artist community, and garden and farm and space just for artists, especially artists of color, right outside of New York City, to have access to and to feel free in. And it's remarkable how difficult it is to actually be out in the middle of the night in the woods or in the field and feel safe, especially if you're a person of color. And that's what you can do up there on this land. And so it came from that need. It's this need to kind of create this space. And then through that, the discourse evolves out of there. And it's rare to think of it as an institution. We kind of think of it as a collective. But it is, it is a real thing. It has a space. There is a space. There's a campus. We do programs. We partner with others. We got a website. For me, I think it comes out of that, being asked.
But it's an extraordinary amount of work, to have property, to take care of that property, to think about how it's going to develop in the future, to set up a structure for other people to come, make their work in there. That's, for a lot of people, that's a full-time job, and you're doing that in the midst of making, a show that we see.
With help.
Yeah, with help, but still, that it didn't come from nowhere. You had to create those structures, and so there are models for that. There are other artist residencies, but you're doing something different. So you have to expand on, you're not doing Skowhegan or Yaddo or, we've been to these residency programs. That's not what you're doing. So you have to really think through this new model. Well, it's a full-time job.
That's true. But that is the reason we think of it more as a collective and more as this space of group study and group learning and group making. So almost like thinking of DH as an artwork as well, a site of creativity, a site of kind of social engagement and creative practice. But for you, I feel like there are going to be the days when many, many successful artists of color and queer artists and artists who, whoever they are, will be able to be able to contribute and not have to work so much. Because I do think that a lot of us are called on a lot. Now, outside of the creative work is the request to serve on boards, is a request to participate in kind of the institutional building. And we have it, and a lot of us feel responsible to do that at a certain place of privilege of success or of capability or of being able to try and create more space. And so that is, I will say, it's an immense honor, but I also think that is a responsibility, and it is a weight as well, right? It's
100%.
So, and I just want to acknowledge that I think that's the case for almost any person of color, anybody, anyone who's queer, anyone who's working in institutions and having to constantly insist on being seen in a particular way. And so I just, I think that's something that in the bigger picture, I hope that does change. I hope artists coming up don't have to necessarily participate in those ways or have more freedom and more space, because it's so essential. And we don't, just a side note, but.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so key. And I really say thank you, because I do think it's important work to be done, and to be asked and then to say yes is a choice, and one that is necessary and is hard work.
Well, you have to believe in the institution too.
Yes.
So I'm on 4 boards now, and they kick my butt now because everybody's in crisis because of COVID and funding. But these are institutions that I believe in, so I'm happy to do that extra work, the 5 Zoom meetings and the special meetings and the, all of that, because I realize it's necessary. So.
And I want to say this tradition goes back, and it goes beyond race. You think of you're on the Rauschenberg Foundation board, so you have the Rauschenberg Foundation, but you also have things like the Contemporary Art Foundation. I think it used to be called
FCA, Art Foundation for Contemporary Arts.
Foundation for Contemporary Performance, it used to be called, and it was started also by Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns to support artists like Merce Cunningham, who was a performance artist and queer, and in that world, this kind of queer found this starting this thing to just give grants to performing artists it was a way of creating space. It was a way of kind of building space for these artists, and artists have been doing that for a long time. The Studio Museum, its founding, its commitment, what it has evolved into. It's celebrating 50 years now, right?
Yes.
It was also founded by this phenomenal group of artists, Black artists living in New York. So I just think that this is something that
you're in legacy.
And it's amazing, because in the same way that the Walker was founded, I was hearing the story from Mary yesterday. There's different dates that have been discussed, but that it has become what it has become.
Yeah.
Just that's a form of imagination that we need to evolve and continue in it, and our world changes because of those spaces and what these people do.
And the new imaginations and possibilities that opened up, which you guys have talked about a number of times today. We're going to open it up to Q&A. Thank you for the conversation so far. We want to now share that with you. If any of you have questions, I think there'll be folks going around with mics. And let's see, I can't really see any hands. While you guys are thinking about questions, here's one.
Here's a question.
Hi.
Yes.
So that was fascinating, and I was like nodding and saying through the whole thing. So thank you, all three of you, for that. And I was just thinking about the last question and the talking about creating systems of support, and thinking about, Julie, your experience, your family's experience as immigrants, and the ways in which your parents created the Mahabar and the system of support for their community, and how much that, I think, is reflected in this, in the kind of foundational understanding of DH, of Denniston Hill, of like communities coming together to sort of find support. And I've often also thought about structures of religion in their best, when they're operating at their very best. I think that they also do that in terms of like bringing together communities and finding a way to sort of lift and hold each other. And so I guess I was also wondering if, for you, Glenn, there was something in your family background or kind of your upbringing that also gave you that sense that you had to bring something to the community that way.
Wow, that's a great question. And not something I'd really thought about before. I mean, my mother was very ambivalent about my becoming an artist, even though she sent me to after-school drawing classes at the Met and pottery classes and all those sorts of things. But I think she thought of that as building a good citizen, not becoming an artist. Because artists don't make any money, so go work in the post office and do your art on the side. But I think, just thinking about her as an example, she had a very large number of brothers and sisters, and my grandparents lived in Washington, and my mom was the one who would go down there every summer and straighten them out, That was kind of her job. So, and I think some of that rubbed off on me, not the straighten them out part, but more the kind of like, you need to be of service to the people around you. And so in some ways, I think, this is a very perceptive question to ask. In some ways, I think that rubbing off, that sense of like you have to be of service, is why I'm on 4 boards, because it's a lot of work, But it's a way of giving back or being a voice in the room to make sure that these foundations give back in the way that I think they should. So yeah, I think that's part of it. So.
There's someone up there. That's a great question, Jessica.
Hi. When you guys were discussing shattering and the sort of the difficulty, right, of experiencing the painting as one thing, right, and the lack of center, what I immediately thought about was Glenn's writing on Concerto in Black and Blue. And so I was actually wondering, Julie, if you had ever reflected on the sort of relationship of that particular installation or David Hammond's work in general in relation to the large paintings.
I mean, David Hammonds is one of my favorite artists, right? And I think one of the most important living artists. I remember seeing that piece in New York and experiencing it on the opening night and being completely flabbergasted and blown away by it at the end. And but I hadn't thought of that in relation to this, and I think that's a really kind of beautiful way to think about experience, time-based experience of an artwork. The brilliance of that is that it's making at the same time as it's, it's invented for you, and it's as liminal and as fleeting as it is as a piece of music or as listening to, And so so, I mean, and then I look at a David Hammond's body print. You have, I think, also a David Hammond's body print that is like what I'd love to try and even come near when I go to the studio every day. And it's one of the pieces that moves me most every day, and has been such an important kind of formative piece for me. So he's been an enormous figure in my thinking, in my creative thinking, and conceptual thinking, and just my upbringing.
Ditto.
I see the sister over here.
And Glenn's essay is beautiful. That piece on that work, really.
Thank you so much. Like, I can't quite believe I got to witness this conversation, but my question is about like this refusal of legibility that you talked about, but also what I see in the work as like a preservation of form. Like, in your work, Glenn, you, even if you can't read the text, you can recognize it as being there. And similar, Julie, in your earlier work, the architectural drawings are like seen as hinting towards some architecture if it's like distorted further. So I'm wondering how you like think about this illegibility, but also a like sense of preservation in that things are still recognizable even if they can't be read fully or understood.
I think that's an interesting way to think about it, because I think, you are in the presence of a text in my work, which is different than the text in a book, or online. And so the painting, I think, is for me about a kind of, and I'm thinking this through as I'm saying it, so it may not be true, but I think it's always like, Kemi asked me a question about body presence, and I think the text for me is about body presence. At least the text that I choose and the way that those surfaces are so encrusted in is about a kind of embodiment, particularly because the first paintings were literally on doors, and that format is scaled towards the human body, so that reference is, I think, in the text works too, but also I think for me the like presence and absence in the work is something I talked about before, like presence and absence of those voices, Baldwin going in and out of focus over the decades. Zora Neale Hurston, famous writer of the Harlem Renaissance, publishes really important texts buried in an unmarked grave, rediscovered by Alice Walker, back on the syllabus in all the universities' English courses. So that kind of sense of, particular writers of color going in and out of focus, in and out of legibility in my work is sort of about that for me.
But also super visceral experiences, I think. Like the glimmers of words and certain words that stand out, feel most colored, or aspects of them, even if you can't read the full text. You see that, and then the way that the paintings are physically made and manifest and have presence in the room, engage with one another, it becomes this really visceral, felt experience. And I think, again, different embodied life experiences engage with those works in really different ways. And for me, I think it's similar. It's just the kind of small, sign or this kind of indicator of something, signifier, right? Like you have enough to understand a particular form of building. You have enough from the window frame to understand if this was a building built 50 years ago or a building built, 200 years ago. And what's suggested with that is enough. Like it is enough of a signifier. You understand what spiral staircases, how they feel, and what, perspectively, how you move through space, how one moves through space, and how opposing spaces work with one. So that's also something that signifies, and you conceptually kind of start, or intellectually or ontologically start to understand something. But then you also viscerally have this experience. So for me, it really goes down to the visceral, felt experience and how that changes. In the galleries here, for me, I think it really changes room to room. The light and the color of the rooms even change because of the way the light is reflected off the work on the ground, and that's specific to these galleries. I didn't experience that in other galleries that we showed this work, but and I think contributes to that more kind of physical experience, from warm rooms to cold rooms to,
That might actually lead me to the last question. I'm looking at the time. That actually builds very quickly off of what you just said. This is the 4th venue. Again, incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Each of the venues have had, and I'm so lucky to have seen it now in 2 venues. I feel really lucky that way. But each of them have their own light, their own architecture, their own ambiance. You've had these years of the research and now the scene of the works in space. Maybe there were some of these were works you hadn't seen in a long time that now, you've gotten to see a number of different times in different settings. My question is, what have you learned anything new about yourself or the work in just going through this mid-career survey?
I want Glenn to tell you what his answer was when asked what's the experience of it, and then I'll answer. What was
please.
I had a retrospective at the Whitney Museum about 10 years ago, and I was doing a Q&A with the curator, and someone from the audience asked, well, what was it like to work, on a retrospective like this? And I said, oh, it's like brain surgery without anesthesia. So I don't know if that was your experience, Julie, but that was mine.
I love that answer. It's a lot of digging and a lot of patience. But I have to say that the experience was really, for us, we because of many things, Christine and I were in conversation for years. And what was wonderful about that is that I was able to look back, and I was in the midst of work that I was working on, and then I was able to really think differently about what I was working on, because I wouldn't have studied my work in the way that we were, in the way that we were being tasked to do with putting together this show. So, I worked on a series of invisible sun paintings that Unji Ju showed in Sharjah. That group was a group that we were working on, and I thought at that time that might be the last cycle I would be able to include in this body of work. But then I was able to make 3 other cycles of work between then and when we opened the show at LACMA. And we intentionally kept room for most recent work in that space. You see that in this space here. And I was able to include even a new painting at the Whitney, an additional painting. So that was to me, it became a very generative process. It was really instructive, and I think it also pushed me a lot about how I wanted to, like, what else could I put in? Like, how much more? So I really had to work harder, but it was exhilarating in that sense, that it gave me a lot of insight. But it was, I really appreciate Glenn's response.
Arrange.
It has been a complete pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much, Kemi, for coming back.
Thank
Kemi
you.
was who hosted me here in residence, as she
and
talked about.
hosted me here too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Glenn for coming. Thank you.
This was wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Congratulations, Christine,
Yeah.
Rue, Julie. Thank you,
Yeah.
Glenn. And Siri's just going to come up and share a couple of words, and then you guys can go up to the galleries.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, Kemi. The galleries are open until 6, so we do hope you all will see the exhibition. And I just want to thank all of you as well for being with us today. It's just been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for watching here and online. We hope you see the show. Thanks so much.